How could a single woman bring the most powerful men of Rome to their knees without a single sword stroke? Amidst the gilded banks of the Nile and the treacherous whispers of the Roman Senate, one figure rose, defying empires, enchanting formidable generals, and etching her name into history with an ink that time itself could not erase. This was Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt. Yet, behind the dazzling legend lies a more intricate tale, a saga of unparalleled wisdom, relentless power, and profound tragedy that few have dared to fully unravel. Today, we journey back to the heart of ancient Egypt to witness how a single woman ascended from mere royalty to become a living deity and an enduring legend. Are you ready? Because today, we're not just exploring how Cleopatra conquered kingdoms. We're delving into how she conquered eternity itself. But before we dive in, please remember to subscribe to the Past Chronicle channel and let me know in the comments which historical figure you'd like to explore next. Let's go. On the fertile banks of the Nile Delta, within a city born from the grand ambitions of Alexander the Great, a girl was born, unaware that one day she would be revered as a living goddess. Her name was Cleopatra VII Philopator. Her destiny, to defy both Rome and the relentless march of time. Alexandria was no ordinary city. It was a shimmering beacon of knowledge, a vibrant crossroads of cultures, a jewel nestled in the Egyptian desert. Founded by Alexander the Great and governed by the Ptolemaic dynasty, the city pulsed with the energy of Greek kings, rulers who, for generations, had reigned over ancient Egypt as outsiders in a sacred land. It was amidst this complex heritage, straddling two distinct worlds, that Cleopatra came into being, and from a young age, she proved herself unlike any other. While previous Ptolemaic rulers had exclusively spoken Greek, often disdaining the language of their native subjects, Cleopatra chose a radically different path. She was the first in her dynasty to learn Egyptian, mastering it fluently, daring to look her people in the eye and address them in their own tongue. This was undoubtedly a shrewd political move, but it was also profoundly symbolic. She didn't just want to rule. She wanted to belong, to embody the very spirit of Egypt. From childhood, she was groomed as a true heir, surrounded by scholars, immersing herself in everything from philosophy, mathematics, and politics to astronomy. Her intellect was as sharp as tempered steel. It said she spoke at least 7 languages, transforming her into a formidable strategist in an era where power often lay in words, not just weapons. Yet, her childhood was far from peaceful. The Ptolemaic court was a minefield of betrayal, intrigue, and insatiable ambition. Fathers turned against sons, siblings against one another. Royal blood guaranteed nothing but the right to play a deadly game. Cleopatra learned early that to survive on the Egyptian throne, one needed to know precisely when to strike and when to charm. As she matured within the palace's shadow, the wider world watched intently. Rome began to extend its imperial tendrils across the eastern Mediterranean, and Egypt, with its gold, grain, and ancient mystique, was the most tempting prize. Few could have imagined that a young princess, amidst a fading empire, would be the one to alter the very course of history. Cleopatra was still a child then, but her legend was already taking shape. What happens when power isn't derived from armies, but from intellect? In a city where books were more precious than gold and ideas more dangerous than swords, Cleopatra grew up amidst the unparalleled treasures of ancient knowledge. Alexandria was more than just a capital. It was a sanctuary of learning. And there, amidst marble columns and papyrus scrolls, this queen began to forge her own legend. Right next to the palace lay the intellectual gem of antiquity, the Library of Alexandria. It housed works from every culture, from Indian medicine to Greek philosophy, Babylonian geometry to Egyptian poetry. In an environment where intellect was revered as divine, Cleopatra absorbed every letter, every concept, as if she knew her very survival would one day depend on this acuity. She wasn't merely beautiful. She possessed a supreme strategic mind, capable of debating philosophers, conversing with astronomers, and negotiating with diplomats in their native tongues. It said she mastered Greek, Egyptian, Latin, Hebrew, Arabic, Persian, and perhaps even more. In a world where alliances were forged through words, Cleopatra needed no interpreter. She herself was her most potent weapon. Yet, her ambition extended far beyond mere knowledge. Early on, she grasped the symbolic power of religion. By associating herself with the goddess Isis, the divine mother of ancient Egypt, Cleopatra didn't merely crown herself queen, she elevated herself to the status of a living deity. The message was unmistakable. She was not merely a ruler, but the living embodiment of a god. For a people accustomed to revering the sacred, this image held more sway than any army. Her enemies underestimated her, believing a woman, no matter how learned, could not withstand the brutal game of power. But Cleopatra understood something they did not. The mind wields the sword, and symbols govern empires. Every word she uttered, every gesture, every alliance was meticulously calculated. In a world dominated by men and ruled by violence, she chose the path of intellect, mystique, and sophisticated manipulation. And as the world watched with bated breath, Cleopatra began to make her first moves on the chessboard of history. She didn't merely aspire to rule Egypt, she intended to resist Rome. To achieve this, simply being a queen was insufficient. She had to become a legend. But what happens when a brilliant mind encounters the most powerful man in the world? Rome had everything except Egypt, and Egypt, though gradually fading, still possessed what the Romans coveted most: grain, riches, and ancient legends. Amidst court intrigues, civil war, and external threats, Cleopatra was cast from her throne by her own younger brother, the very sibling with whom she had once shared power. But she refused to be a mere supporting character in her own story. During her exile in the desert, fate, or perhaps her own cunning, presented a singular opportunity. Rome had arrived in Alexandria, led by the most powerful man in the Western world at the time, Julius Caesar. What unfolded next was no accident, but a calculated maneuver. Legend has it that Cleopatra had herself delivered to Caesar, smuggled in a rolled carpet. It was a dramatic entrance, marking the genesis of one of history's most compelling encounters. But what truly captivated the Roman general was not merely her beauty, as later poets often romanticized, but her sharp intellect, audacious spirit, and imperial vision. Cleopatra wasn't seeking a lover, she sought an ally. Julius Caesar, seasoned by countless battles and betrayals, instantly recognized the strategic value of this young queen. With Caesar's backing, Cleopatra reclaimed her throne, and Egypt once again shone brightly, albeit under Rome's protective shadow. What began as a political alliance swiftly blossomed into a deeply personal relationship, an intense passion between two ambitious and formidable minds. The scandal in Rome was immense. How could their most celebrated general father a child with a foreign queen? How could he honor Cleopatra's statue in a temple as if she were a Roman goddess? But Caesar disregarded the criticisms. He was utterly enthralled. Egypt and Rome were bound by a love affair that defied all geopolitical logic. Cleopatra didn't just claim a place in Caesar's heart. She arrived in Rome with all the splendor of an Eastern deity. Her presence stunned the senators. Yet, power always attracts enemies, and Caesar had accumulated many. In 44 BCE, Caesar was assassinated in the Roman Senate. Cleopatra was devastated but not defeated. She returned to Egypt. Her son, Caesarion, was now the living embodiment of the alliance between two great powers. But Rome neither forgave nor forgot. She had lost a protector, but she was far from out of the game. Even as a new player rose to power in Rome, Cleopatra was already plotting her next move. What happens when the next ally is not only younger, but also more susceptible to influence? As the echoes of daggers still resonated in the Senate and Caesar's blood had yet to dry on the marble, power in Rome became a brutal, lawless game. Octavian, Caesar's adopted son, and Mark Antony, his loyal general, vied fiercely for control of the empire's future. Meanwhile, In the south, Cleopatra watched and waited. She knew Rome was wounded, and she also understood that wounds often open doors to opportunity. Mark Antony was impulsive, courageous, and hungry for glory, a stark contrast to the cold calculation of Julius Caesar. He lacked Caesar's measured composure, but possessed the charisma to lead legions into battle. And when he needed resources, soldiers, and a strategic base in the east, his gaze turned towards Egypt. Cleopatra received him not merely as a queen, but as a living goddess. History recounts her arrival at Tarsus as something out of a myth. A golden barge, purple sails billowing, exotic perfumes wafting through the air, and ethereal music echoing across the waters. Mark Antony was utterly unprepared. No one could have been. The impact was instantaneous. He was captivated at once. But Cleopatra wasn't seeking love. She was seeking power. And Antony, with his own ambitions, was the perfect ally to protect Egypt and challenge Rome. Together, they forged a relationship intricately woven with both pleasure and politics. They reveled in extravagance, lavish feasts, and alliances that profoundly shocked the Roman Senate. Yet, while they were absorbed in celebrations and promises, tensions with Octavian escalated. Rome would never tolerate a foreign queen interfering in their affairs, especially one who styled herself a new Isis and dared to carve up the empire with her lover. Octavian, shrewd and patient, masterfully crafted a dangerous narrative. A manipulative queen had bewitched a Roman hero. In the eyes of the populace, Cleopatra became the Eastern enemy, a symbol of decadence and a grave threat to Roman civilization. The rupture was inevitable. Reshaped. Cleopatra and Mark Antony confronted Octavian's forces in the momentous Battle of Actium. But this grand display of power spiraled into tragedy. Overwhelmed and outmaneuvered, they were forced to flee, and their dream of a new empire crumbled. The Roman world was no longer Caesar's. And for Cleopatra, that could only mean one thing: the end was drawing near. What does a queen do when even the gods seem to have forsaken her? Rome had made its decision. There was no place for a foreign queen in the new order. And though Cleopatra still wore gold and spoke like a goddess, she knew her world was unraveling. Egypt, the last bastion of the Hellenistic age, now stood alone. After the defeat at Actium, Mark Antony and Cleopatra retreated to Alexandria, a city that had once been a beacon of knowledge, now poised to burn. Besieged by Octavian's armies, betrayed by allies, seemingly abandoned by the divine, the couple faced their fate like tragic legends. In his despair, Antony received false news that Cleopatra was dead. Bereft of hope, he fell upon his sword. In his final moments, he was carried to her side. It is said he died in her arms, amidst silks and tears, as their palace seemingly crumbled into dust around them. It was the end of a general, but not yet of a queen. Cleopatra, ever astute, attempted to negotiate with Octavian until her very last breath. She offered wealth, power, even her life, but it was futile. Octavian sought no gold. He demanded the ultimate symbol of surrender. Cleopatra in chains paraded in his Roman triumph. But she would never allow such a humiliation. According to accounts, she donned her royal attire, adorned herself as the goddess Isis, and secluded herself in her mausoleum with 2 loyal handmaidens. And there, amidst whispers of legend and serpents, she chose her own demise. Some say she used poison. Others claim a deadly asp delivered the fatal bite. One thing is certain: she died precisely as she had lived, with sovereignty, strategy, and an aura of enduring mystery. With her death, the Ptolemaic dynasty ended. Egypt ceased to be a kingdom and became a Roman province. Her son, Caesar, was executed. Treasures were plundered, palaces dismantled. But Octavian, who would soon become Augustus, knew he had lost something he could never conquer: the eternity of a symbol. Cleopatra, the last queen of Egypt, had woven her legend so powerfully that even Rome could not erase her from humanity's memory. It was not merely the end of a woman. It was the end of an epic. But can death truly extinguish the flame of a legend? Rome had won. Legions marched across the sands of the Nile. Egypt became another jewel in the empire's crown. Yet, amidst the ruins of plundered palaces and silent temples, one figure refused to vanish. That was Cleopatra. The victors write history, and Octavian ensured that the defeated queen's image was molded to his will. In official records, she was depicted as a dangerous seductress, a foreign sorceress who had corrupted and ruined two of Rome's greatest men. Her wisdom was labeled treachery, her power, manipulation. But the truth, as always, is far more complex and compelling. Cleopatra was more than just a lover. She was an unparalleled strategist, an erudite ruler, a woman who confronted the era's greatest superpower with intelligence, diplomacy, and sheer audacity. While others ruled by the sword, she ruled through symbols. While others sought dominance, she sought survival and transcended every perceived limit. Through centuries, her image has taken on countless forms. She's been a goddess, a sorceress, a heroine, a martyr, a symbol of the mysterious East, of burgeoning feminism, or of tragic love. Writers, artists, and filmmakers have reimagined her time and again. Cleopatra did not perish in her tomb. She was reborn in the world's imagination. No other Egyptian pharaoh has endured in memory as long as she has. Not for military conquests, but for something far more potent: her ability to transform history into myth. Today, over 2,000 years later, we remain captivated by her. We wonder what her true face looked like, whether she genuinely used poison or if her love for Mark Antony was sincere. But above all, we ask how one woman could defy history's greatest empire and achieve immortality. Because death may stop a heart, but it cannot halt a legend. Thank you all for watching until the very end of this video. If you enjoyed this kind of content, remember to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming videos. We'll see you in the next one.